What's up, guys? We're Horizon X. Let's talk about Atlantis today. This might not be a mere legend. An ancient civilization lost 10K plus years ago. As we learn more about the Sahara, the desert's eye seems intriguing. Surrounding it are flood-like marks. Also, impact layers found in the Atlantic. Could this Sahara eye actually reveal the truth of Atlantis?
On June 3rd, 1965,
Gemini 4 launched. 2 astronauts stayed in space for 4 days. They completed the second spacewalk, took a stunning photo. Sahara's eye. It resembles Plato's Atlantis exactly. From then, the legend spread widely. Atlantis was said to vanish 10K years ago. An advanced civilization once existed, but Atlantis sank beneath the ocean and its ruins disappeared forever. But now, things are different. Astronauts discovered their ruins, matching ancient records in the desert. Could this desert be Atlantis reborn? 2 years later, the U.S. Navy launched a secret mission. Its files were declassified in 2004. Then, an independent U.S. investigator, Jimmy Corsetti, said, "I found in the files that the Sahara Eye was investigated by the Navy." The declassified files concluded, this was part of the Navy's Magnet Project. The project aimed to collect the world's most precise geomagnetic data. These data were used for mapping, advanced navigation, space programs, and other U.S. scientific projects. The investigations spanned the globe, focusing particularly on the Richat structure in Mauritania's Sahara, also known as the Sahara Eye. It seems after astronauts returned, not only did Atlantis legends spread, but the U.S. military showed great interest too. Moreover, from the declassified files, the Navy likely discovered something. Because within the file details, there were 2 redacted sections. The first smaller redaction stated, "We used an aerial transport platform equipped with a redacted data receiver for data collection." The second redaction was more intriguing. The file mentioned, although the scientific aspects of this investigation were entirely unclassified and open to scientists worldwide. But what exactly happened next? Sorry, even with the Freedom of Information Act, the redacted parts remain undisclosed. Reflecting on this statement, what does scientific aspects unclassified mean? Doesn't it imply that the redacted parts are non-scientific? Could this really be Atlantis clues? The questions form a bottomless rabbit hole. Jimmy decided to dig deeper.
2,600 years ago,
Greek scholar Solon visited Egypt. An Egyptian priest in a vast, dark temple told him the story of Atlantis. Back then, the seas were navigable. A powerful army advanced eastward, arrogantly attacking Europe and Asia. Beyond what Greeks called the Pillars of Hercules lay a Nessos, home to the army. On that Nessos was a mighty alliance of kings known as Atlantis. They ruled that Nessos, many other islands and parts of the mainland, and so on. Solon and the priest talked all afternoon. But what is a Nessos? What does the seas were navigable mean? And where are the Pillars of Hercules? What is the great and wondrous power?
140 years later,
The father of history, Herodotus, visited Egypt again, but he found crumbling temples and pyramids buried in sand. The priests, keepers of ancient knowledge, had aged. Information about the ancient world became fragmented pieces for Herodotus. Fortunately, these fragments later inspired Herodotus to draw the earliest known world map. To the east lies India, ancient tombs, the Valley of the Cyclopes, and endless deserts. To the south, untamed Ethiopia and Libya. To the north, vast unknown lands and countless rushing rivers of mystery. And to the far west, we spot the Pillars of Hercules. It refers to today's Strait of Gibraltar. What about Atlantis beyond the Pillars? Sadly, Herodotus' world ends here. Beyond the Pillars, there's nothing. But as we glance slightly southward beneath the Pillars, we see clearly Atlas and Atlantis. So what did Herodotus discover back then? Another 100 years passed unknowingly. When the great Greek philosopher Plato retold this story, he said he had never visited Egypt, but had compiled Solon and Herodotus' accounts of Egypt. The story of Atlantis, as he explained, went like this. First, Atlantis was destroyed. It happened 9,000 years before Solon, or about 11,600 years ago. Second, the great and wondrous power was an advanced power beyond its time. Third, the king of Atlantis was Atlas, son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. The king's alliance was a club of the sons of gods, with a dozen kings ruling over nations as advanced as Atlantis itself. Fourth, Atlantis waged a reckless war on the day they nearly destroyed ancient Athens. The king of the gods, Zeus, triggered a catastrophic earthquake and tsunami to destroy their arrogant nation, turning it into a place unreachable by ships. This description is strange, but if we combine it with the earlier strange phrase from Egypt, the seas were navigable, it seems like they're describing those advanced nations, the dozen nations atop the Nissos, the king's alliance, after the disaster, became an unnavigable ocean zone. But what kind of ocean zone is unnavigable? Does this really mean the seabed? Investigator Jimmy believes this may not refer to the seabed, but rather describing a cataclysmic event in the Sahara Desert. Why did Herodotus place Atlantis in the present-day Sahara Desert? It's likely because he was convinced the ancient Egyptian priests had shown him the coordinates of Atlantis were in the desert. A very unfamiliar black king named Mansa Musa ruled over the Golden Empire of Mali. Mali was the nation of the Moors after intermarriage, but it was already the 13th century. The entire Egypt and North Africa had already adopted Islam. Ancient memories were very scarce. However, we can still dig up some clues from historical details. For example, in 1324, Mansa Musa went on a pilgrimage to Mecca, laying down golden carpets along the way, lavishly spending gold in the holy city, causing a severe devaluation of gold for over 20 years afterward. For example, the Gatrof Pass we mentioned earlier was a place guarded by the Mansi people for generations and later confirmed to have rich uranium deposits underground. Similarly, the Arabian desert, the birthplace of Islam, had been barren for thousands of years, but now it's discovered that the wealthy desert dwellers' lands are full of oil. Similarly, Jimmy noticed that the Moors also remained in the Sahara Desert, whether through intermarriage or Islamization, they refused to leave. By the time of Mansa Musa, people discovered that their lands were rich in minerals. These mineral deposits happened to match Solon's description of Atlantis. Solon said the central temple of Atlantis was built with gold, silver, ivory, and brass. Gold and silver are easy to understand, and ivory can also be explained, as the Sahara was still a lush oasis at the time. But what is brass? Solon also mentioned that brass was used to make advanced weapons, which reminds one of vibranium from Black Panther. Some experts point out that the brass in Mauritania is actually nickel iron ore, a rare mineral globally but very abundant in Mauritania. If people could make weapons from this nickel iron ore thousands of years ago, then compared to the bronze weapons of the Athenians, it would definitely be a form of advanced technology beyond its time. It's important to note that nickel-iron alloys are still key materials for tank armor and aircraft shells today. From the ancient Mori people to the Mali Empire, and to today's Mauritania, this lineage continues. The Eye of the Sahara is located within Mauritania. If you visit there today, the locals will tell you the first king to rule Mauritania was named Atlas. That's right, the same Atlas, the king of Atlantis mentioned by ancient Egyptian priests. Is this really a coincidence? Clearly not, because the Mauritanians can accurately say that their king came from the northern mountains and came to the location of the Eye of the Sahara, where he built an incredibly advanced civilization. And the mention of the northern mountains also appears in Plato's records, stating that to the north of Atlantis were great mountains and to the south a vast ocean. Corresponding to the Eye of the Sahara, there is a small mountain at the eyebrow on the north side, and there are water erosion marks in the desert to the south, which seem to correspond to the northern mountains and the southern sea. However, Jimmy believes the real northern mountains should be further north and are the Atlas Mountains on the southern shore of Gibraltar today. This mountain has been known since ancient times, even by Europeans, and it is called the Atlas Mountain. Plato said that the center of Atlantis was a circular island with a diameter of 5 stadia, followed by a protective moat, 1 stadia wide. Outside the moat was a circle of islands, 2 stadia wide, with baths and hot springs. Then there was another protective moat, 2 stadia wide, followed by another ring-shaped island, 3 stadia wide, with sports arenas and hunting grounds. The outermost layer was another protective moat, 3 stadia wide. Beyond that was a stone wall separating the central area from the city of Atlantis. The city area was 50 stadia wide, inhabited by citizens and officials. The central area was actually divided into 3 layers. The central island was separated by a circle of mountain copper, the brass, This area belonged to the gods and priests. The first surrounding ring was separated by a tin wall belonging to the king and high priests. The second surrounding ring had bronze walls inhabited by nobles and priests. According to conversion, one ancient Greek stade equals 607 feet, about 185 meters today, so the diameter of Atlantis would be about 23.5 kilometers. The size of the Eye of the Sahara is exactly 23.9 kilometers, and it clearly has a three-ring island structure. Even a rough calculation shows the three-ring islands ratio matches 5.2 So are there really hot springs on the central island today? Jimmy says that according to a 2014 study, underground beneath the Eye of the Sahara, there is actually an isolated alkaline hydrothermal complex dating back to the Cretaceous period. This is reminiscent of the alkaline hydrothermal complex at Yellowstone National Park today. Outside the Eye of the Sahara, there is a land ripple extending southwest. The opening of the eye appears to have been washed by a massive flood. It seems that the remnants of Atlantis were washed from here into the desert and then carried westward by the desert flood into the Atlantic Ocean. Enthusiasts once ventured into the Eye of the Sahara and found locals selling various artifacts dug from the desert, like spherical and triangular objects. Some were spherical, others triangular, with unclear meaning and purpose. If you think these are just natural desert formations, the local museum preserves even more man-made artifacts. Could these really be advanced technologies from 11,600 years ago? In 2006, a Norwegian research team discovered a large marine sediment structure near Mauritania's shelf. The study suggests it was likely formed by a massive tsunami. It may not look large on a map, but on satellite images, its scale becomes clear. It's enormous. Located on the continental ripple line, it spans over 130 kilometers wide. Its cross-section shows a staggering thickness of 3,200 meters. Evidence of ancient advanced technology might be buried below. 130 kilometers wide, 230 kilometers long, 3,200 meters thick. This shows how massive the flood was. If we consider this the flood's end, where did such a huge water source originate? This question is hard to answer. Just a few rivers upstream of the Eye of Sahara? Jimmy initially focused his research on river theories, but he gradually uncovered something even more fascinating. Why does Jimmy think Plato's northern mountains refer to the Atlas Mountains further north? It's based on two reasons. First, Mauritanian folklore states that their ancestors came from northern mountains and traveled here by boat. Second, Plato mentioned that Atlantis had advanced transportation, with a convenient network between Nissos. From Atlantis's Nissos, one could navigate to various world destinations. Trade groups from everywhere visited the city. So, Jimmy hypothesizes that this could describe the Sahara as a lush Eden 10,000 years ago. From the Atlas Mountains to the Eye of Sahara and the Atlantic coast, there might have been a large river, tentatively named the Atlas River. The Atlas River was abundant in water, creating a vast wetland known as the Atlas Wetland, suggesting that each Nessos wasn't an island, but rather a series of wetland habitats. But does such a hypothetical river really exist? Can the Atlas Mountains in the north truly provide such abundant water to the Sahara Desert? Studies indicate that Kusi Mountain, now an extinct volcano, was active from 2.4 million years ago until about 24,000 years ago. Its last eruption likely occurred 24,000 years ago, after which it became inactive. Jimmy then noted that if we closely examine satellite images of Kusi Mountain, we can see a distinct ring of eruption marks around it. Assuming these eruption marks are from 24,000 years ago, a closer look at the southeastern eruption marks reveals clear signs of water erosion faults. This indicates that after Kusi Mountain's last eruption, massive water flows eroded its eruption marks. This further suggests that 24,000 years ago, the Sahara still had a sea. However, this isolated evidence is not enough, so the search for more signs of the sea in the Sahara continues. Soon, we discovered a strange clue. When the Sahara was a green Eden, scientists reconstructed a comparison map. This is not ancient history. The map shows the Sahara 20,000 years ago, filled with lakes and wetlands. The map shows that near the Eye of Sahara, many Nissos areas existed. The largest lake shown is Lake Chad, which still exists today. Experts studied Lake Chad's sediments to reconstruct this 20,000-year-old Sahara map. However, Lake Chad is quite mysterious, showing many contradictory clues. For example, one contradiction is Lake Chad might be called Ancient Chad Sea because many marine sediments were found here, along with salt flats that remain undried, resembling another inland sea. Ancient Chad Sea seems to have been a structure connected to the ocean 20,000 years ago, possibly linked by rivers at both ends. The problem is, we know water flows downward, and the ocean is the lowest point on Earth, at sea level, 0 meters elevation. Therefore, such an inland lake structure connected to oceans on both sides is theoretically impossible. Unless Lake Chad was truly like an inland sea, a basin below sea level, where seawater could accumulate. However, Lake Chad is over 400 meters above sea level. This means that 20,000 years ago, a sea existed 400 meters above sea level. This surpasses the scope of Atlantis' advanced tech. If such a massive sky sea could be created, it would require unimaginably advanced technology. Moreover, what would be the purpose of creating such a sky sea? Thus, the key to solving the sky sea mystery clearly isn't here. Next, Jimmy is about to propose a new hypothesis to help reconstruct the truth about Atlantis. Plato said the south of Atlantis was an ocean from which one could sail anywhere in the world. Plato also described Atlantis as a structure of concentric sea rings, which were connected to the southern ocean. Thus, we can infer that 20,000 years ago, the Eye of Sahara might have been filled with seawater. Was it due to rising sea levels? Data analysis shows that for this to happen, sea levels would need to rise at least 400 meters for the Eye of Sahara to match Plato's description. However, a sea level 400 meters higher 20,000 years ago is impossible. No evidence of this exists anywhere else on Earth. Even the much-discussed Younger Dryas event only caused a sea level rise of about 20 meters. Moreover, notice this sea level data. 24,000 years ago, sea levels were 140 meters lower than today. So, how do we explain the Eye of Sahara's unusual sea level issue? Could it also be a sky sea, similar to the ancient Chad Sea? Could Plato's Nessos have been not islands, but sky islands? Did the Atlantis army, which attacked ancient Athens 11,600 years ago, set out from these sky islands? What exactly happened here 20,000 years ago? Suddenly, Jimmy recalled a detail Plato mentioned, how Atlantis was destroyed. It wasn't just the flood, but also unprecedentedly powerful earthquakes. We all assume earthquakes cause land to sink, but earthquakes often uplift land instead. What does it mean to become inaccessible by ship after destruction? It wasn't earthquakes and tsunamis sinking it into the sea, but rather earthquakes lifting it into the sky. Could the disaster that destroyed Atlantis 11,600 years ago have been a kind of Earth seesaw? Jimmy suddenly noticed that experts confirmed a sunken continent in 2019, Zealandia. Zealandia is located near New Zealand, and experts confirmed it as a true sunken continent. The exact time of its submersion is unknown, but the cause was tectonic drift. It stretched thinner and sank into the ocean. What about our other landmasses? They are like buns protruding above the sea. Zealandia was once a large pancake above sea level, but it was stretched too thin, and its elevation dropped below sea level. Now, only New Zealand's 2 islands remain above the ocean. If one landmass sinks below sea level, does it mean another is uplifted into the sky? While this hypothesis is bold, it's notable that West Africa's Sahara and Zealandia form a mirrored axis on Earth. In other words, digging through the Earth from the Sahara would lead directly to New Zealand. This suggests the seesaw principle might explain why, as Zealandia sank, the Sahara was uplifted. Why is Lake Chad now 400 plus meters above sea level? Why does the Eye of Sahara need to be 400 meters lower to match Plato's account? It's likely that Zealandia's sinking and Sahara's rise occurred during the same global catastrophe, the global disaster 11,600 years ago. Scientists refer to this as the Younger Dryas event. Although scientific evidence so far only shows that this event caused a global ice age, with glaciers reaching as far as modern-day Turkey, it's possible that beyond current findings, the 2 ends of the Earth, New Zealand and the Sahara, experienced a simultaneous rise and fall. The ancient civilization of Atlantis, located at the Eye of Sahara, was situated at the epicenter of this upheaval. Violent earthquakes destroyed their ruins, and massive tsunamis carried the debris straight into the Atlantic Ocean. The entire Sahara Eden was violently lifted above sea level. This catastrophe is like pulling a half-submerged plate forcefully out of the water. Only then could there be enough water and impact force. Evidence of this catastrophe includes whale fossils found in the desert, the elevated Lake Chad, and the dozen vanished Nessos Plato described. Some suggest that before this disaster, the Sahara was traversed by the sea, but after the catastrophe, the Sahara was uplifted and the Eden gradually dried out. By 3,000 years ago, it became a desert. Why could Solon, 2,600 years ago, visit Egypt and converse freely with the Egyptian priests in temples? But just 100 years later, when Herodotus visited Egypt 2,500 years ago, he only saw pyramids buried in sand. Another 100 years later, Plato, 2,400 years ago, could only recount Solon's myth-like stories of Atlantis. It's because the Sahara was uplifted and its drying process was extremely fast. In just 200 years from Solon to Plato, it was the Sahara's final remnants of life. Ancient Egypt, also on the Sahara's edge, dried up after Atlantis. Why could the Egyptian priests tell Solon the stories of Atlantis? Because the Egyptian priests said they were brothers to Atlantis' civilization. Perhaps the pyramids and the Sphinx, relics from the Atlantis era, survived the Sahara's uplift. However, studying the link between Egypt and Atlantis is another story altogether.